Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. No matter where you are across the country and around the world, this is the best time to be exactly where you are, right here and right now. And that is with us, the Global Livingston Institute's virtual academic panel on innovating international education amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Andrew Ward, and I'm a professor of international development at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'm also the director of special projects for the Global Livingston Institute, or as we tend to call it, the GLI. Today, I have the great privilege and pleasure of moderating the inaugural GLI virtual academic panel, which is designed to address a very timely and pressing matter indeed, namely connecting with GLI's academic partners from the US and East Africa to better understand how their universities are responding to the pandemic in relation to curriculum, innovations in learning, student experience, and international engagements. In order to address these and related matters fully, we have assembled a team of experts with extensive experience from Boulder to Bujumbura, from Winter Park, Florida to Winter Park, Colorado, and quite literally all in between. But before I ask them to introduce themselves, allow me to introduce to all of you the founder and CEO of the Global Livingston Institute, an accomplished academic in his own right, and a passionate fan of Barry Manilow, Dr. Jamie Van Leeuwenhoek.
Thanks, Andrew. Nobody can get somebody as excited about an academic summit as Andrew Ward can on a Wednesday morning. And so thank you all for being here. And I just want to briefly thank all of our panelists, all of whom are great colleagues and scholars that we've had the pleasure of working with. And during this unprecedented time, I think that one of the things that we found from the Global Livingston Institute side of things, both in Africa and the United States, is that there's been this unprecedented spirit of innovation and collaboration to really come together and talk through things and understand kind of what's happening in the world and ways that we can work together in different ways to address a different approach to university work, a different approach to research, and a different approach to international development. So I'm actually really excited to hear what our panelists have to say. They're all folks who have worked with us for many years that have helped us move students through programs, and we're currently rethinking with them. We're listening and thinking and acting with them to look at what the new spirit of international development looks like moving forward. So, and I want to thank our board really quick. We have a number of board members on the call today: Cynthia James, David Lord, Felicity O'Haron, Christine Robertson, and Agnes Agoya. Agnes is one of our board members from Uganda. And so this is truly a global conversation today. I'm actually based in Hong Kong right now. We have colleagues who are going to be speaking to us from Uganda and Rwanda today. And we obviously have folks from the US. So we're really excited about the dialogue and appreciate your making time. And I look forward to hearing what people have to say. So thank you, Andrew, and onward.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. Now, for those of you just joining us, this panel will follow a fairly simple format. We're conducting it live, as you know, via Zoom. It is being recorded in the interest of posterity. We tend to believe that future generations are going to want to know how present company weathered the storm and how the new reality got its, genesis, maybe, and perhaps through some of the conversations that we have here today. Short introductions will be followed by a series of questions geared for individual panelists, taking into consideration their specific area of expertise. And I will later direct queries that have arisen organically throughout the discussion, then followed by taking questions from you, our viewers. Please note, everyone save myself and the panelists have been put on mute. So if you have a question, please make use of the chat function, the orange box at the bottom of your screen. And I will be able to field them with Kat, our administrator's help, when the time comes. In the interest of time itself, I know we all have Google Calendars filled with more Zoom meetings later on, so let's dive right in, shall we? I'm going to ask each of our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves, letting our viewers, and it looks like we've got almost 40 of them right now with 30 more registered, who you are, what type of work do you do, and let us know briefly, also by way of introduction, what significance does international education have in your work? And let's begin with Professor Wendy Boulder.
Well, hello, everyone. Greetings. My name is Dr. Wendy Bolyard. I am a clinical assistant professor and director of the Bachelor of Arts in Public Service program at the University of Colorado, Denver. I teach public service students, but also teach in our Master of Public Administration, or MPA program. mainly teaching Intro to Public Affairs and a course on research and analytic methods. In addition, I serve as campus director for the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance and oversee the program in which students earn their Certified Nonprofit Professional or CNP credential. Also the faculty advisor for our new Alpha Phi Omega chapter that is currently in the charter process. And the work I do is centered on teaching and administration and most importantly, serving students.
Fabulous, thank you. Professor Faraj, greetings
Yes.
from Kigali.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Gaidi Faraj. I'm the Dean of African Leadership University in Kigali, Rwanda. We have a second campus in Mauritius, and between the two, we have about 1,200 students from 40 different countries. Our mission is to develop the next generation of leaders for the African continent. My work is really focused on providing a supportive and enabling environment for our teams to give our students the most holistic learning experience possible.
Excellent, thank you. And Director Gisleda, joining us all the way from Winter Park.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gisleda Beaudin, and I'm Director of Global Initiatives at Rollins College in Florida. We're a small liberal arts institution that also has graduate programs, MBA program, and graduate programs, a number of small graduate programs as well. And my work encompasses two broad areas. First, I oversee our Office of International Programs, which is all of our outbound study abroad programs, both full semester programs and all of our short-term programs, for credit, not for credit, research experiences, internships, anything where students are traveling out. I also work with a faculty coordinator and a cross-campus committee to think more broadly about campus internationalization and how we can enhance global learning throughout our campus community.
We love thinking broadly. That's what we do at GLI. Thanks for mentioning that. Yes, and Director Roof.
Good morning, and thank you, Andrew and Jamie and GLI for putting this on, and the fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to be with you from Boulder, Colorado. So Aaron Roof, I'm the director of the President's Leadership Class, which is a co-curricular leadership program for high-performing students, and the executive director of CU's Boulder's Center for Leadership, which oversees the entire campus in support of the Chancellor's top imperative to shape tomorrow's leaders. So what I do is try and provide a transformational experience for our students at CU Boulder. And the role of international education in that, I'm sure for this entire audience is quite clear, and I don't have to convince you the impact that immersive overseas experience has on young people. Yeah, it's rooted probably in my personal experience where I grew up in a very sheltered kind of Baltimore city, never leaving the state of Maryland, and then to spend time overseas. I think everyone knows the impact that has on young people. It certainly had on me. And so it's, I think, a key piece of the experiential learning for our future leaders.
And a key portion of today's panel, we're going to be trying to figure out exactly what that looks like in the current pandemic and hopefully what it can be going forward. Now, greeting us originally from Connecticut, now by way of Kampala, Director Tom Karrel.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Karrel here. I work as Director of Operations in East Africa for GLI. So Andrew and Jamie are not only good colleagues, but good friends. At GLI, a lot of what my work does and brings is working with academic partners. We have over 25 from the United States and East Africa that I work with to essentially collaboratively do the best community development work on the planet. So both inform, do research on, and practice good community development, both in the United States and in Uganda and Rwanda. What that looks like, a lot of immersion trips and courses, research collaborations with academic institutions and local organizations, student internships, and designing curriculum on how to teach all these different lessons and also learn about these lessons as well. International education is very much ingrained in my person, both professionally and personally. I often use those words to describe what I do for a living, which is tough to describe sometimes. It's really much at the center of our organization at GLI, sort of idea of cross-cultural collaboration and education. Everything we do is around that, and it's really trying to involve pretty much everyone across the board to give them a seat at the table and involve them in the conversation around, solving our development problems in the world.
Excellent, thank you, Tom. And for a point of fact, both Tom and Jamie Van Leeuwen are alums of Tulane University, just like myself. So we've got a good crowd. I had to do a shout out for our wave. So let's dive right in with our first question today. And this is going to be for you, Gaidi, and for you, Aaron. How has curriculum delivery and programming been adjusted at your institution specifically due to COVID-19? You know, everybody has been scrambling so piecemeal and madcap from the beginning of this pandemic. And we'd love to figure out what's going on at ALU and what's going on in UC. So Gaidi, would you mind starting?
Yes, absolutely. You know, it's on the one hand, it's what hasn't changed. But on the other hand, you know, it's on the one hand, it's what hasn't changed. But on the other hand, we felt kind of lucky because we already had an online learning management system that was a part of the student experience. So when universities closed, when we were forced to close our campus and shift everything online, there was not a major lift for students or staff to learn new programs or platforms to begin to engage. We just had to do some adjustments to the actual course material, some adjustments to the assessments because some of our assessments were like in-person presentations. And so how do we change some of that? But in general, it was a pretty natural transition to fully online. What we found, however, is that because also, you know, in Africa, a lot of countries closed their borders. So as soon as we started to get an inkling that might be what happens, we had to organize to fly home about 200 of our students within 48 hours. And so now we've got students who are spread out across time zones and have different connectivity issues. And so what we've done is focus on designing asynchronous ways for them to engage. So we have synchronous ways of engagement where we have Zoom calls, Google Hangouts, where we have in-person sessions where students can talk to the facilitator, et cetera. But we're posting more materials that they can engage with at their convenience. A lot of our students, just for cost reasons, are going to engage during off-peak hours, et cetera. So that's been one of the biggest changes, is that we move into a much more of an asynchronous design for our curriculum and our materials. Another major change for us is that we recognize it's not just about their courses and their learning experience, but we believe that a lot of what students learn and what they get from ALU is outside of the classroom. They receive a holistic experience for us. So we really had to focus on how to move our other programs online. So our Student Wellness Center is offering online counseling. Our Student Life team has continued to engage with students. We've encouraged students to continue to hold some of the activities that they would have in the afternoons or the evenings. They have a student panel, for example. So one of our student groups just had a panel last night. We have a end of the year awards and assembly that's going to happen fully online, as well as taking care of our staff. So just last week, we had an all community quiz night. So students and staff could continue to engage with each other and feel connected as a community. So a lot of the bigger lift has been shifting the non-academic pieces online. So our students could still feel connected and have a holistic experience with the university. And that's required a lot more work for us.
What type of feedback have you gotten regarding some of these extra activities that are moved to the online platforms?
That's the tricky one. You know, the thing about feedback right now is that we're generally getting feedback from people who are not having trouble connecting. And so we know that the biggest issue is the feedback we're not getting. And that's what we're most concerned about, because we do know there's a portion of our community that we've kind of lost touch with. And we're trying to engage with them in various ways, particularly as they're still engaged with some of their peers. And so sometimes it's second and third hand information. We had a community-wide webinar for all of our students to kind of share updates with them. And then we also had one with our parents. And that was really encouraging because a lot of the parents gave us positive feedback about our response, how quick we were, about the support that they feel like we're giving to their children. So that's been very encouraging for us. There was some difficulty from the students in the beginning because a lot of people missed kind of the community feel of being in class with each other, but they've adjusted pretty well to the online iteration. And so generally the feedback we get is positive. So our concern is, what about the feedback we're not getting?
Mm-hmm. No, that's excellent. Very, very important question. And the idea then also is that any academic institution worth its salt has to create a community of lifelong learners. So it's very inspiring to hear that you're bringing in also the previous generation, the parents, as well as lateral ones. Well, Aaron, I'm going to move over to you. And now we have a taste of what's going on at ALU. What's happening at UC Boulder?
Yes, sir. Well, first, I'm envious of ALU then, because we were a little bit more resistant to the online learning. And I say that obviously CU Boulder is not a homogeneous institution, and there's great diversity in our schools, colleges, and really at the professor level. But if I had to generalize, there was, previous to this, there was great resistance to the online or remote learning. And so then to have that forced in a matter of days was quite a shock, I think, to the system. Just like ALU, we kind of deferred to the individual professor level, whether they wanted to do a synchronous or asynchronous model. And then there was also some discussion about whether we continue to try and meet the learning objectives that we had in class, or whether we have to adjust those learning objectives because of the kind of new normal. And I'll be honest, every professor is doing it a little bit differently. And so we gave great latitude to the individual professor to meet their learning objectives in the manner they best see fit. And that's kind of how we're kind of riding out this semester. And I should mention tomorrow is the last day of classes, and we're into finals. So I think it was a short sprint to finish and then figure out what's going on in the fall, which I know we're going to talk about innovations later, but that's really where I think the most interesting conversation is going, is what to do in the fall. You know, I think the Institution for Higher Education released an article earlier this week about 15 different versions of learning, you know, spanning everything from completely remote to completely in person. The University of Colorado very much wants the in-person experience. The chancellor's been very clear that for all the reasons that that were mentioned, that you know, it's just a little bit different, and Boulder prides itself on that community and the kind of holistic experience. The other interesting conversation is whether to treat the first year experience different than the upper 3 classes or graduate experiences, as CU is trying to improve student success. So student success defined as graduating in 6 years. And you know, the data is pretty heavy that student success is largely based on that first year experience, and whether you build strong bonds both with your community and then with a professor or staff member, and how that might look. And that's really just being talked about now, but we're going to have to make some decisions, I think, before we have all the information to understand what the fall is going to look like. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's
Totally.
kind of an interesting time.
Also begs the next question, which is the idea of how much of it is being centralized at UC Boulder with regard to how the programming should be implemented. You mentioned that it's very fragmentalized this current semester between every professor essentially doing something different. Is the move, or the conversations that are happening now about centralizing and streamlining and uniformizing the delivery of academic programming, or is it a different conversation altogether?
I think it depends on who you ask. So if you try to centralize anything, I think there'd be a revolt by the faculty of CU Boulder. They're not big on centralization. That said, obviously for safety reasons, there needs to be some overarching guidance for you know, how that's going to work. So I think it's going to be a hybrid version. There's going to be some guidelines, you know, that'll be applicable to all, but then how that's actually implemented within those guidelines will still, I think, be you know, some latitude at the school and college level, and then at the you know, professor level, which I think is smart and probably good. And obviously we have such diverse student populations. It would be kind of silly, I think, to have a writ large policy that because of the variations in you know, learning objectives, student populations, et cetera.
Well, the last thing we'd want would be open revolt coming down the mountain from Boulder. So we'll try to avoid that.
I don't know that you can. I think that's been going on for about 100 years.
We'll go to another point across the Centennial State. And Professor Bolyard, what are your thoughts around online and virtual learning, as has been, you know, briefly touched on, whether it's the synchronous, asynchronous design, whether it's the centralized versus fragmented? What methods have you found to be most effective, and perhaps which ones not so much?
Thanks, Andrew, and Aaron, I'll follow up on some of your comments as well. But I've been teaching online since 2004, so I have a lot of thoughts about online learning.
Wow.
Clearly most effective when it's not happening in the midst of a global pandemic, and when it's a shared choice of both the teacher and the student. So despite the challenges facing today's students, we might ask, can they be successful learning online? The quality of interactions in online courses, especially the frequency and effectiveness of student-faculty interaction, is associated with higher academic performance. So students with higher levels of perceived academic control are shown to earn significantly higher grades. And this is something that we'll struggle with during the pandemic, as students lose agency over their preferred modality. So it's important for faculty to consider how they co-produce knowledge so that students regain some of their academic control. So just as I finished week 9 of our semester at CU Denver, the university closed and my research and analytic methods course was moved from the classroom to online. So I had 29 graduate students suddenly found themselves learning statistics online, which was not what they signed up for, as many told me outright. So research tells us that students report preference for easier classes online and harder classes in a traditional format. So I asked my students how best I could serve them, offering to record asynchronous lectures, meet synchronously, or a combination of both. And they asked that we continue to meet weekly at the same time, but that I also post recordings of my lectures and stats demos. So as active participants, they co-created what they wanted the final 7 weeks of the semester to look like. As I moved my class online, I had to make sure my online class works for everyone, not just the able-bodied and the neurotypical. This semester, a visually impaired student is in my class, so online learning must also be accessible. We can't have student success without access. If we do not even the playing field in rural areas and other geographies, to Gaidi's point, our privilege with big screens, projectors, laptops, smartphones, and high-speed internet access blinds us from the reality that there is a great digital divide to be overcome. 2 weeks into quarantine, I canceled DSL and self-installed a cable modem, having lost patience with lag time. For many higher ed instructors, the rapid shift from face-to-face teaching to emergency distance learning has been chaotic at best, and its success or effectiveness can be operationalized in so many ways. It's context-dependent, multidimensional, and complex, making it challenging to identify the underlying factors that predict success of our online students and the effectiveness of online learning. Evidence-based teaching practices for effective online learning include 6 principles: peer-to-peer interaction, active student engagement and learning, emphasis on practice and student effort, personalization to the individual students, variety, and emphasis on higher thought processes. Effectiveness is rooted in sound pedagogy, not fancy technology. And these principles are by no means exhaustive. The rapid integration of online learning and constantly changing technology requires relentless introspection and analysis, and COVID-19 offers an opportunity for just that. So I want to mention that the program directors in our School of Public Affairs recently wrote a letter to all of our students, many of whom are public servants on the front lines, serving the unhoused, feeding the hungry, managing emergency response, and keeping our community safe. We first thanked them for the service, and then we promised our students these things: that will offer flexibility in policy and practice so they have every opportunity to succeed. We promise to listen first, then act with care and kindness. We promise to trust in their ability and foster their potential. We promise to nurture inquiry, connection, and collaboration in new and creative ways. We promise to strive to make sound decisions, admit our shortcomings, and do what is best for them. We promise to try to model courage and strength and to look for them for shared inspiration and energy. We promise to speak out against the ugly racism that has emerged with this virus. We promise to work to communicate often and openly and offer direction and hope. And as we collectively experience considerable social grief, we promise to lead with empathy and understanding. I mention these promises because they are no different now that we are teaching online than if we were teaching in the classroom. In light of the global pandemic, we wonder what methods for online instruction are most effective. And I believe they are the methods where we focus on care more than content. So this is not the world that we taught in 2 months ago, irrespective of modality. We are all facing disruption, uncertainty, distraction, and fear, but we are showing up in new ways on new platforms using new tools. And my hope is that we see this as an opportunity to be more intentional as we strive to be better at connecting, listening, teaching, and learning. The entire world is hoping to do the same.
And I think a significant portion of the world would like a written copy of your comments right there. We would definitely appreciate you sending that in so we could distribute it for our readers and our viewers, and then definitely so that we can continue to look at it going forward. I love the concept of how seamlessly it fits in compassionately and consultatively. Rule number one in any sustainable international development initiative is consult the primary stakeholders. You're never going to have any hope of pushing something forward without bringing them to the table and having them involved. And that's what you guys are doing. And you said it so succinctly. Specific modalities and presentations, whether technological or not, are not really the most important thing, but doing it with compassion and doing it with engagement will lead to the highest level of academic success. I didn't put any words in your mouth, I hope. Would you say that's accurate?
I think that's absolutely true, Andrew, right? And so our focus wasn't, how do we get everybody up to speed on technology? It was, how do we get them to co-produce the rest of the semester and then plan accordingly for summer and fall?
So as you mentioned, we were all sort of flung into this chaotic experience together, and this mad scramble ensued where we all try to figure out, okay, how do I teach statistics online? Now imagine, for our colleagues like Gisleda, who are now ground to a screeching halt, okay, sorry, the study abroad world will now be frozen in time. The pandemic has a clear impact upon study abroad programs everywhere. We are all feeling the pinch. How is your team adjusting to it? What are you doing? How are you looking at the future? Are people hiding under couches wearing pots on their heads? Or are people gallivanting into a bright, shining tomorrow, waving the banner of hope?
Well, that's a good way to frame the conversation here. So, I guess when I thought about this question, I thought about this in terms of stages. So stage one for us was that, and I think for pretty much everyone I know who works sort of directly in the field of education abroad, was simply sort of this triage response as countries were, case numbers were sort of exploding, and there were travel bans being imposed very suddenly, and flights were being canceled, and so the triage stage was simply about making decisions about when you were bringing students home, if you were bringing students home, how you were bringing students home, right, while trying to honor both students and parents' levels of concern, which frankly varied very widely, right? So some students wanted to come home immediately, and other students and parents wanted to wait as long as possible and sort of try to assess the situation. So that was stage one, which I think was largely just a reactive stage. Stage two was also reactive, but I think has a lot of potential in terms of looking forward. So stage two was that we now had all these students who either had returned from abroad or who were supposed to be going abroad, and we had canceled programs, and that meant that we had a need. So we have large majors that require a global experience or study abroad experience. And our business programs almost all require a global experience. So we had to think about what we were going to offer to replace that required global experience for students that were graduating in the short term. So students graduating this summer or this fall. So we very quickly have developed a 1-credit course for Maymester, which we're teaching multiple sections of, which is called Global Citizenship, No Passport Required. And we are trying to be as creative as possible under a short time frame in terms of thinking about how we can engage students with the concepts of intercultural competence, but also utilizing the sort of television, video resources we have, trying to think about how we can get students to maybe still interview people virtually, just ways that we can kind of deploy some kind of global engagement to replace those experiences. So this was a solution to a problem, so it was reactive, but I think it's exciting because at least here at Rollins, we have for a very long time wanted to develop courses like this that would accompany the study abroad experience, and have really frankly never had the bandwidth to do it because we are sending quite a high volume of students abroad. So this is also sort of the reactive, solving the problem reactively is also a way that we may start to enhance global learning down the road and sort of have now a course that's built and ready to be used, whether or not students can travel in this next year, in the future, right, et cetera. I think the third stage is now this sort of looking forward, which is right now looking towards next year and thinking really there's still a lot of questions. We don't know yet if we're going to be able to run study abroad programs. So I think much like academic institutions as a whole, we're trying to be quite flexible about sort of how we're thinking about study abroad next year, and I think that flexibility requires quite a high degree of transparency and communication with our students, those of whom are already tracked towards study abroad, or those of whom are hoping to study abroad next year. And then also we run many programs that are led by our own faculty. So being also really transparent and honest and supportive of our faculty. So I think that's been really important as we start to look forward. I think also having strong partnerships. So we've been in really close communication with many of our partners abroad, including the GLI, and trying to think about how we can utilize our partners. Many of our partners are responding with very rapid innovations to try to think about how they can support global learning if students can't travel. And so that's really meaningful for us, because there's things we can do on our campus, but there are things we can't necessarily do or can't do as quickly as maybe some of our partners who already have networks abroad and already have maybe capabilities that we're not quite ready to do yet. So I think the strong partnership piece is really key. To me, the big opportunity in this forward or future-looking phase is that we have always sort of wanted to do more to explore ways to engage students globally without travel. We currently send about 70% of our undergraduate students abroad. So we know that we're getting most of our undergraduate students right through a study abroad experience, but there are some who can't travel. And even those who do travel could benefit, we think, from having more engagement with sort of global prior to travel or after travel. So I think thinking about sort of ways that we can explore the global local, right, and do more with virtual exchange, and sort of, I think that's really where the field is thinking, and that to me is really exciting. I do think people seem to be quite energized by the idea of thinking about how you do intercultural learning without traveling and what that looks like. So I think that's sort of that final phase, is forward-looking and being creative and building. Frankly, the field of international education has done quite a bit already with virtual exchange. And so there are institutions out there that have been doing that for a number of years, and there are best practices and there are resources. And so I think there are some templates to follow to start really looking. Same thing with the idea of engaging with local global communities in meaningful ways. So we have best practices already out there, which is really exciting.
It is, and pandemics are not the only reason that people are going to be shutting down whole programs or universities in years going forward. Whether it is conflict, natural disaster, economic downturn, or whatever else, the solutions that we devise today will pay dividends in the years going forward. And I love that you broke it down into those separate stages. We also hope that you'd be willing to share the syllabus for that global citizenship Maymester class. If it's non-proprietary or whatever, I think a lot of people would really enjoy taking a look at that, and then sort of standing on your shoulders and building upon the solutions you made. 70% of your undergraduate student body studies abroad.
Yes.
That's got to be some kind of record. That's incredible.
Yes. Yeah, we're in the top 12 nationwide.
Wow. And proudly, we can say that a number of them go straight with the GLI to East Africa, where we cast our eyes now to an apartment building in Kampala. And there's Mr. Tom Karrel, in the director of operations with this nonprofit, the GLI. And I direct you sort of pivoting somewhat, because that's a key word everyone uses on Zoom meetings these days. Let's move from pure universities to how can nonprofits be working with universities to address some of the gaps in learning? What are some examples of education solutions to these COVID-19 challenges that you've devised, that you've seen, or that perhaps you might even suggest we wholesale avoid?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. I'll preface this by saying that I think a lot of the core to my answer honestly applies with or without the coronavirus pandemic. I think a lot of these points, I think to Wendy's kind of the same theme that Wendy brought up, I think are applicable to a world with or without the coronavirus pandemic. They're just all that more pressing. But I think when it comes down to it, this is not a groundbreaking conclusion by any means, but I think nonprofits and universities just need to be making more connections and partnerships more intentionally. I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration than currently exists. Coming from our perspective, we use academic partnerships. I mean, that's integral to all of our programming. I think it helps create synergistic relationships. It allows nonprofits to do more than they would be able to do otherwise, as well as universities. I think nonprofits, where they add a lot of value specifically, is just helping schools diversify opportunities. And again, that applies to before and after coronavirus. Anywhere from research opportunities, real world case study kind of examples, whether it's East Africa, domestically in the US or in other countries, extracurricular activities, e-conferences, professional development opportunities for students. And again, as Gisleda mentioned, and alluded to, I think there's a lot of nonprofits out there that work in the education space that are innovating curriculum and have been innovating curriculum, for years and do it really fast, that I think universities can tap into, and vice versa. And on that line, I think nonprofits, another value add is that they have typically a lot more flexibility and mobility than academic institutions. So to make a sweeping generalization, a nonprofit like GLI might be able to move a lot faster than a university in the University of Colorado network, just because of the nature of the beast, the nature of the organization. So the way hierarchies are set up, the way programs are approved and things like that. So a nonprofit can churn out a program very quickly, and they can be a lot more mobile with how they reach their audiences and do things like a virtual panel and all these sorts of things. So I think that mobility helps a lot. It's a lot of value add nonprofits can bring. A couple examples that have jumped to mind in the last few weeks, I've been perusing the internet, trying to stay off the news as much as I humanly possibly can, but I've been getting referred a lot of cool articles and information about organizations that are doing cool, virtual engagements in education, just from the nature of my job. One interesting example that I actually got from Jamie, our CEO, is the Smithsonian Institute. So the Smithsonian has this massive learning lab, they call it. You can go on Google and access it. It's been going on for some time, but it's this massive open source interactive learning module and multi-module content that is a compilation of content that's been put in by independent organizations and students. You can also tap into it to learn about all sorts of things. So it's not exactly like the Khan Academy, but it's a much different way to access knowledge and create knowledge. And we've actually heard about organizations that are using it as sort of a framework to engage students in to create their own learning labs. It's kind of an opportunity to actually have students start putting some content out there about what they're learning, what they want to learn, and actually access some of these resources because they have a little more time to do it in some cases. Additionally, our friends at Ashoka U, a really cool organization that really uses design and design thinking and links up with a lot of change maker related universities in the US, I think something like 50, and then hundreds around the world. They do an annual exchange, which is sort of an adapted, innovative version of a conference. They had to do their exchange this year virtually last month, but I actually talked to one of their founders, and she was telling me that they had some unforeseen benefits, which is that their attendees were through the roof and actually higher than expected, and they got a much more diverse pool just because folks could tune in from wherever they were, and there weren't as much cost prohibitive things like flights and access points. So it actually helped them create a more diverse experience, and overall was really successful. So there's a way to do e-conferences that aren't exactly clunky and are really engaging for different folks. So I think that was really interesting. And then again, for the shameless GLI plug, but we've been rapidly developing a new program ourselves, which we call the Global Scholars Fellowship Program. It's something we were working on in the past, but we just put it on the priority and are already doing our first cohort this summer in June. We're gonna have close to 50 students that are gonna be engaging in a completely virtual 5-week intensive fellowship program where we essentially teach and engage students in the same things we do normally with an East Africa in-person experience, all the way from community development best practices to research to interviewing constituents and doing fun engagements with music and different things like that. So it's going to be cool. We'll see how it goes, but we're trying to answer the question on how we can redesign, the sort of our model amidst coronavirus. And it's also helping us diversify as an organization because the international travel to East Africa, for example, creates a huge barrier to entry just financially, among other reasons for students. So it's allowing us to tap into a totally different pool of students that either time-wise or financially couldn't tap into some of these opportunities.
And now literally being brought to the table quite possibly for the first time ever.
Exactly.
I love the shameless plug for GLI, Tom. Way to get that one across. Really appreciate it. And I also, I specifically asked everybody what your institution was doing in the realm of technology or sort of compassionology or whatever else. Now I want to know what else is twitching your antennas. What are you hearing from other institutions? What are you hearing from your partners that maybe are some good ideas? Or again, I keep saying, maybe there's something else that's sort of cropping up like an evil mushroom that we don't want to be, implementing. Maybe there's some really good solutions that you've not necessarily seen firsthand at your own institution, but that you've seen elsewhere. And that you might suggest to our current panel and to our viewers as something that they might wish to explore further. Gaidi, you want to start?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that really stands out to me is that almost overnight, the entire world shifted to online education and nobody was using any new platforms. All the tools already existed. And so the question is why weren't more people using these tools banned? And how can we really push people to think about, well, what are the better tools we can create? What can grow out of this? So we can think about if we had an optimal online experience for students, what would that look like? However, we also are really trying to push a conversation around not just thinking about how you innovate tech, but let's think about innovating the overall system. Let's innovate the learning model itself. At ALU, we push an entrepreneurial and problem-solving based curriculum, and we tell our students we want them to have a missions not majors mindset, which means don't focus on what it says in your degree, but really think about the impact that you can have in the world. And I think this global pandemic is a great example of why that's so important. We need to shift educational models to be much more practical to the world that we live in today. When I was in school, I was learning the same thing that my parents and my grandparents learned when they were in school. So how do we innovate curriculum, innovate the learning model itself, so it's more relevant and practical to the problems that we're facing today as a world?
Oh, excellent. And I'm definitely going to get that tattooed somewhere, mission, not major mindset, sticking with that going forward. Aaron, did you want to add to that?
Well, I think Gisleda kind of mentioned the global local perspective that I think Yale has been doing for a couple of years, where instead of going overseas, as Tom mentioned, they have a program that takes Northeastern students to a farm in Texas or downtown St. Louis, which everyone knows can be quite a shock and still may meet maybe some of the similar learning objectives that global travel has. For the University of Colorado Boulder, I think the greatest innovation maybe is the culture change to higher education, in that historically, I think we weren't very adaptive. It took 5 years to study a problem, 5 years to implement, and then we forgot what we were changing in the first place. Whereas in the past couple of months, we've seen, I think, some really strong leadership from our senior leaders, adaptive, putting in some best case plans. So we're still planning to travel abroad for the next summer, but then contingencies, decision points, and being a little bit more flexible to kind of adapt to the new normal or the current environment that I think, I don't have a background in higher education. So, and there's a lot of people in Boulder that do come from different backgrounds. And so I think that maybe there's a little bit more receptivity to taking the lessons learned from other industries and then applying them to higher education. So, I come from a military background, and special operations and counterterrorism has been dealing with, things like the pandemic or the chaos or unknowns for many, many years, as well as sharing information through virtual platforms for many, many years. So the best practices are out there. We're not necessarily plowing new ground. We're just plowing new ground for, I think, higher education in many ways. At least that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, I think it's worth a little bit more than 2 cents, but yes, and it also goes back to something that Tom had said, the idea that the GLI can be a lot more swift and fast moving than the decade-long processes that often take place at universities based on the old, monastic model with these hierarchical internal structures. Wendy, was there something you'd like to add?
I'll just add, just to emphasize that the era that we're in is not working from home. This is pandemic work. And so I love opportunities like this where we can curate some of our resources around this. And to Tom's point, I look forward in years to come where we do have, massive open educational resources that address the kinds of things that have come to light because of a global pandemic. And I've tried to emphasize with my students that, you know, even though this might not be exactly what they expected in the last weeks of the semester, imagine the kinds of skills that they are gaining by surviving this, right? So being nimble and creative and adaptive and flexible. And I don't think that we can emphasize that enough.
Mm-hmm. No, excellent point. And that nimbleness and that creativity, flexibility, and level of care is something, Giselda, you mentioned you saw coming out of many of your partners all around the world saying, oh, wait, we have an idea. We can still create this global experience. We don't want to let this partnership go by the wayside. Just, you know, we're basically having long distance relationships with all of our partners around the world. What are some of the better ideas and plans and suggestions that some of the partners have suggested so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's been interesting to us. I think students seem quite hungry for virtual experiences, especially this summer. So the virtual global experiences that we've been promoting, we've seen a lot of interest from students. So that feels really heartening to me, because it does suggest that they are seeking out those connections, and that they're seeking out the connections again with the global, which is really, I think, really heartening and really hopeful. So I love what GLI is doing. We ended up with 10 students who applied to the GLI Global Fellows Program, which we were thrilled about. So I think that's a really unique model, because I know, from experience how deep GLI's sort of partnerships go. So I know students are going to be engaging with Ugandans and with Rwandans. So it's going to be this very sort of direct engagement. We've also seen a lot of interest with partners who are running remote internships, and I think that's quite an interesting model. And because the pandemic is not necessarily hitting every country in exactly the same way at the same time, remote internships, a company in the US might not be hiring interns, but a company in Australia might be willing to work with remote interns. So I think that's a really interesting idea, right? That you can sort of have that sort of nimbleness around where can students gain professional experiences. We also have some partners just sort of a little more similar to what GLI is doing, who are kind of offering virtual classes, but again, virtual classes where they're going to be connecting with, faculty in the UK, or people working on the Innocence Project in Ireland, so again, kind of taking advantage of those global networks. So I think that's some of what is interesting. I mean, what I would love to see more of would be more ways that we can connect students to students from across different universities. That's tougher, I think, because that's a large faculty lift, and I do think faculty are being asked to do a lot of heavy lifting right now. So, but I think that's an area for exciting innovation, would be to have more team taught classes or collaborative projects where students from one university and students from another university actually collaborate on a class project, so that I think is an area of innovation. I think I'd also add too that one thing that if you're sort of saying that the thing we might be anxious about, or sort of the negative side, is that Rollins is a liberal arts institution, and the liberal arts and that kind of idea of a holistic education has been under attack in the United States already, right? And I do worry that it may be further weakened by all of this, and sort of creating that idea of an in-person experience, and that sort of rounded holistic education that is about a community, right? That might get lost. So I'm hopeful that we can honor the strength and opportunities that we can do virtually, and the ways that we can be creative, but that we also recognize that there are differences, and for some students, that sort of in-person communal approach may still be the right one.
I think you just gave us 3 or 4 solid silver linings right there for all the world to see and embrace. I have one more question for you all that feel inclined to answer, and it's not on your sheet that I gave to you preliminarily, and then I want to open it up to our viewers so that as many people can ask all the questions that they have for you as well. But basically, what a lot of people are saying, we're talking about the new normal, etc. The phrase that I'm hearing more and more is, there's no going back. there's no way we can ever be what we were before the pandemic. In New Orleans, we said the same thing about Katrina. There's no way we could go back to being what and who we were before the storm. And now, it's a global storm that everybody's facing. And so what are some things, whether concepts, methodologies, technologies, that you think are just, they've gone the way of the dodo, for lack of a better phrase, and we won't see them returning when we return to open world? Just wave your hand if you want to take that one. Or I can be my professorial. Okay, go for it, Aaron.
Well, I hope you're right, Andrew. I'm not sure you're right. And so, we've had this conversation with a lot of our students and a lot of our faculty. I personally believe that, the world and certainly the country has not been, so universally impacted since about 1944, 1945. And so, that birthed the greatest generation, and, at least, and so I'd like to think that you're right, and there's going to be some wonderful, David Brooks talks about the moral meaning of the plague, and it will forever change us in a very positive way. I wave between cynicism and optimism, and the cynic in me says that, at least speaking for Americans, we have a very, very short memory, and we could very much go back, for better and for worse, into kind of pre-plague, pre-pandemic thinking. So I think that's the question of the day, and I think that the generation that's in college now will largely define that, more so than us.
I think, if I can jump in, I think one of the things that we found is that this has proved more than anything how engaging an online experience can be and how easy it is to connect with other people. And so I feel like that's one of the things that we can't go back to. We used to spend a lot of time engaging in online meetings in order to set up in-person meetings. And it seems like now we can just skip right to it and have more engaging online experiences. I love the point that Gisleda was making about having more student experiences where they're engaging from abroad. What about pen pals, right? We used to have pen pals when people were still writing letters. But what about the idea of like virtual pen pals? So there's a lot of things I think we can do to just really carry forward the momentum of the online engagement and how the successes that we've seen from that. So I think we're not going to go back to a place where everybody's just expecting that there's only value if you can meet in person.
I, for one, am a huge proponent of pen pals, just for the record. Yes. And Tom, oh no, Wendy, go for it.
I just wanted to mention, I think that the thing that we won't go back to is business as usual, right? Because I think higher ed is sort of operated on this model of this is traditional higher education and this is how we've always done things. And I think this provides us an opportunity to be much more forward thinking. And I hope that that's what sticks through this pandemic, so that we don't just, we don't want to go back to business as usual, because perhaps we're learning that that wasn't the most effective way for us to teach and to learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tom, I saw you nodding. I can't tell if you were ready to jump in there.
Yeah, sure. I can chime in on something. Maybe it's not exactly your question, but I do think that, building off Wendy's point and everyone's point, like it's definitely an interesting, internal design opportunity for academic institutions, but also from my perspective as like an external, nonprofit NGO, how we're conducting our work in general. I think philosophically, it's given me some time to kind of step back and say, like, how would I be conducting my work if it was a clean slate and I didn't really know what best practices were and I wanted to be really effective, and I had all these amazing resources like Zoom and different platforms. Would it be effective to do a lot of it on that? Maybe not. I think Gaidi makes an interesting point that maybe it is more effective in some cases, but I do think I will admit I'm the eternal optimist in pretty much everything I do. I think there are actually a lot of institutions and academic institutions that are inherently actually pretty well positioned for this situation. Two that come to mind off the bat are Aaron at CU and then Gaidi at ALU. ALU has such a focus on problem solving for their students and teaching that, mission approach and solving those questions and being their own leaders. They've been learning basically what would happen if something like this, a crisis happens or if they need to change society. So I feel like their students in particular are already really well positioned to, solve some of these questions and are very in tune with their teachers and professors, or even facilitators as they call them, and are really well positioned to answer those questions and help. At PLC, I mean, I've sat in on some of the PLC classes in Colorado before, and students themselves lead some classes, and they're very much empowered to design curriculum themselves and lesson plan. So, I mean, students kind of understand a little bit, at least, what it's like to be a facilitator and teacher. And I think that's a good position to be in as well, because to Wendy and Gisleda and everyone's points, I mean, the students have to be in this conversation in some capacity, although the decisions are going to get made by faculty and administration. I mean, we have to do something that is really beneficial for these students, you know, whether it's study abroad or genuine concrete lessons and curriculum. I think students need to be really informed and part of the conversation. So, you know, students as part of the president's leadership class at CU, I think are already well positioned to do that. So that's kind of the optimist perspective. I think a lot of institutions are actually kind of ready to make some of these changes, or at least rethink the way they're already doing things. They'll just, hopefully this gives them a little time to redesign and rethink.
And the students of today are the professors and administrators of tomorrow. And the idea that they're all digital natives. And to Sharon Carnahan's point, we were getting some comments from our viewers now. The world knows how to use WebEx and Zoom. Parents understand more about the intensity of their children's college work since they are doing it at home. All North Americans are aware of the variety of inequalities in their students' lived experiences. The ease of inviting guest speakers from other countries has become so apparent. We will not go back to business as usual in the liberal arts. A door has been opened to technology and connection online. Then David Lord, our board member, says the pandemic provides an opportunity to think about crisis on global bases versus national basis. This crisis has affected all countries. For example, I find it interesting to see how the crisis has affected people in Uganda versus the US. Sharon comes back. The term my students had COVID-19 pen pals in China and Spain. This term, oh, that's fabulous. Oh, okay, wonderful. Pen pals for the win, Faraj, it's happening. And Hannah Rose, as a student, I have encountered professors who are reticent to innovate their classroom, even in light of COVID-19. I'm sorry to hear that. What would be your advice in starting? This is an excellent question. What is your advice, panelists, on starting a conversation with professors who are slightly recalcitrant, if not outright resistant, to employing technology or innovating?
I would have to say that I think the focus needs not be on technology, right? And so we use technology to enable the teaching and learning, but I think part of what I've seen happen in light of COVID-19 is that faculty have been thrown a million different tools and ideas and best practices and trainings and webinars, and there's just so much happening that if we can just stick to here are our learning objectives, right? How do we co-produce knowledge to get there? I think that's much better than saying, you know, everybody needs to know these platforms or this technology. So how would you, right, prepare for any semester? The delivery might look a little bit different, but I think for the most part, the rest looks the same. Sure.
And from the student's perspective, you know, what advice would y'all have about, like, especially if you're a freshman, like imagine this is your first year, how do you initiate a conversation with a tenured professor who is, you know, to say the least, set in their ways, and, you know, get them to follow Wendy's sage advice and, you know, and innovate in a non-tech focused manner, but in a much more collaborative learning space? Gaidi? Oh, wait, Wendy, yes. Excuse me, not Wendy, Gisleda.
This is just a suggestion. I don't know if it would work, but I taught a class this spring, and the first day of class, this is a tested model. I did not make it up. I read it in an article, but you know, set a class contract and ask the students to engage with me in setting a class contract. So they were able to say what they wanted from me, and then I also said what I wanted from them, and we all decided what we wanted from each other to make the class successful. And that feels like it could be a very non-threatening thing to ask a faculty, to sort of say, you know, myself and my colleagues in this class want to come to this class and make it meaningful and good. Would you be willing to kind of develop a class contract with us about what we will agree to, like doing all the readings, showing up ready to talk, right? You know, sort of, right, what we will give, and then sort of what you will give. And that maybe is one way to go about it. I don't know if faculty would be receptive, but possibly.
Banding together like a union and presenting a contract. I love it. Hannah, maybe that is a path forward for your, reticent professors, a class contract, coming at it collaboratively rather than, attacking or even giving the sensation of attacking. Jerry, all the way from Uganda, gives us this comment. He says, in Uganda, there is not a single university that has administered online classes due to technological challenges. This is rather sad. We needed to adjust to the new normal like yesterday. So what comments and or advice would you have for Jerry's situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very unfortunate situation. There's a lot of different countries that responded different ways. Thankfully, in Rwanda, for example, the government worked very closely with the telecoms. They reached out to the universities to ask us what our e-learning platforms were so that they could get them 0 rated so students could access their online platforms on their phones, et cetera, for free. And so I think part of it is similar to the answer given to Hannah. Ugandans need to speak up, different countries need to speak up and make suggestions, be collaborative in trying to find solutions to some of these problems. But at the same time, students need to recognize that globally, a lot of programs have put their content online for free. And so there are all alternatives that might necessarily earn them credit in their program, but can keep them moving forward in their learning because different governments are responding in different ways.
And various governments provide different sets of rights and or privileges to the very concept of education itself. This question just came in. What do we do about typically rural areas without access to the technology, which we somewhat addressed? How do we uphold health policies put in place, but also not go against their rights to education? I see the wheels turning. Tom, why don't you tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think I'll be able to nearly tackle that one, but just to comment on it, like, I think above all, I mean, I was the former public health student. I think there's certain levels here, right? Like obviously immediate health concerns and health implications for yourself and your community need to take precedent in these kind of situations. And the truth of the matter is it's unfortunate in some cases that students can't, maybe access those online platforms immediately, but we still have to abide by, what our ministries of health and governments and CDC and WHO are telling us in terms of public health practices. I actually found it really interesting. I was talking to one of our partners. They're a charter school network in Chicago, Illinois, domestically in the US that are also having trouble with that online access, just with students, whether or not they have access to laptops. I think Gaidi's point is really interesting, whether or not they're even able to tap in these e-learning platforms just with like Wi-Fi constrictions or stuff like that. So I think the truth of the matter is it's unfortunate, but, I think the health and the public health matter takes precedent. Hopefully once that passes, we can kind of get back to normal education practices. I guess, again, being the kind of optimist, I'd say that maybe when you have that time where it's inevitable, if you can't access that education, try and engage with your teachers or fellow students somehow to start having conversations about what are we going to do when we get back? Is it going to be the same? How can we better prepare to when we get back to school so that we can pick up where we left off or make progress in their absence? Are there things we can be reading from home, et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely don't think I tackled that question, and I don't know if anyone can, to be honest, fully, but I think there's ways we can be preparing ourselves from home, whether or not we have access to, Zoom, et cetera, to better prepare ourselves to get back if we're a student, a teacher, et cetera.
No, I think you did, I flung it at you and I thought you tackled it quite nicely. And in the process, it spurred a few more comments and questions that popped up, including this one from Edward Davis. The current crisis allows us to reimagine global learning spaces within a praxis of compassionate humility. We all could use more of that. The Northern Hemisphere views the Global South in terms of underdevelopment, but the reversal of health inequities give us reason to pause. Certainly conversations in community formation provide space for transformative pedagogies of equity. Followed shortly thereafter by focus in Rwanda, most of universities are engaged using online in their studies. For the high school and primary, the government institution, that's the Rwandan Education Board, has started using online materials with free cost by accessing their platform. However, the big challenge are infrastructure to all people in Rwanda. One thing that I think we will not go back to after this global pandemic is to find enough infrastructure to all people so that they can access online benefits. your mouth to God's ears, focus. I agree. I think we probably need a lot of infrastructure for everybody, and it's not just in Rwanda. Gaidi and I have both gone to school in the Deep South. We know that infrastructure is a problem down here as well. And Barb Grogan, oh hi Barb. I think of our beloved Bishop John in Rwanda, who led their healing after the genocide. If they can heal from that, then we can heal from this, and we will be better for it. Thank you for all you're doing to make that happen. And another question for all of our panelists from our distinguished CEO, none other than Jamie Van Leeuwen. He says, could you talk about what you think COVID is going to impact the concept of collaboration itself, how we work together nationally and internationally? Is COVID going to improve how we work together or stifle it?
Well, I mean, if I can jump in first, for us, we're really hoping that it improves it. You know, one of our degree programs is in global challenges. And the idea is that we need to, we encourage our students to think about global challenges first that are impacting their communities, and then the continent, and then the world at large, and how can they focus their learning around solving those particular challenges. And this pandemic is showing that, yes, there are problems that impact all of us. And so it behooves us to work together to solve those problems. It wouldn't make sense for us to return to our silos and focus on only the problems that we think impact us, and then get hit by another, some sort of global challenge, be it climate change or some other natural disaster, asteroids, et cetera. There's all kind of potential threats that we should be paying attention to as a global community.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And another question came in that almost seems specific for you, Wendy. How does this virtual learning affect students with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly concerning. I mentioned the visually impaired student in my class in particular. And so in addition to our weekly class meetings, I meet with the student, via phone call just to make sure that we're connecting and on the same page. But I also have a niece on the autism spectrum. And so as she is learning at home in the 6th grade, right, I'm very concerned about the impact on education for people that are not potentially able-bodied or neurotypical. And so I lean on our experts, right, to tell me the best way to adapt materials. But Agnes, keep asking that question, because we need to keep addressing those concerns.
Excellent. Thank you, Wendy. Also, I wanted to acknowledge that Barb Rogan's comment about Bishop John, Barb is one of our stalwarts board members and, arch supporters of everything that GLI is and ever has done. And Aaron, it's interesting how we sort of identify ourselves almost on the spectrum of positivity. Like, Tom over there is clinically euphoric, and you describe yourself as somewhat cynical, cautiously cynical. But in, sort of going back to the question that I gave to Gaidi, the idea of, is COVID going to hurt or benefit, international collaboration on a larger scale? What's your sense? What does your gut say?
So I'm a closet optimist. So I actually am cautiously optimistic, and I think, I feel like this I think almost losing something makes you realize how special it is. And so the fact that we have not been able to get some students abroad, and we had, obviously our international education disrupted, I think highlights the importance of it. You hear a lot of student feedback about how much they're missing it, so I'm hopeful that, you take something away, you realize how special it is. So we'll double down on our efforts to figure it out moving forward. I hope. I know I will.
Wonderful. Look, we have gotten some great comments and some great questions from the crowd, and you guys handled them, fantastically, like tennis balls being shot out of a tennis gun. The overwhelming concept that I'm hearing is that there are silver linings, and that as academics, you are constantly going to be reformulating whatever the situation is, looking for ways to deliver the service of education and the inspiration of a love for learning and a connection to the globe as much as you can, as far as you can, as long as you can. And I think for any final statements, if anybody would like to make any last adds, whether it's for silver lining or hope for the future, closet optimism, clinical euphoria, minor cynicism, etc., now you would be welcome to do so. Giselda?
I mean, I would just echo that I think the need for intercultural competence is more clear than ever before, right? So, and I think that, so to me, there will be increased collaboration. I know there's a counter dialogue, right, about shutting down borders and closing movement, but I don't think that counter dialogue will win out. I think it's very clear that international cooperation and collaboration is critical, and having the skills to do so is really important.
Absolutely. And what this whole situation has done is shine a light on those inequities and on those needs and on those gaps in service and gaps in connectivity. I believe that you guys have done a tremendous job of focusing on what's happening, what solutions there might be both within your institution as well as what you've heard elsewhere, and what we can all do shining together into the future. Again, thank you very much for being here, for taking the time. This is going to be recorded, it has been recorded. It'll be posted within the week to the website, and please feel free to share it with everybody else. Giselda, I know people have asked for a copy of that syllabus, if you wouldn't mind sharing. And Wendy, I know people would love a copy of your opening remarks as well. So to all of our viewers, thanks for tuning in. And for our inaugural panel, we hope we can have you back soon as well. One last plug, because that's what we do here at GLI, is shameless plugs. We will have a virtual concert on Friday at 11 a.m. Denver, Boulder time, 7 p.m. Kigali time, 1 o'clock Florida time, and noon. I will be hosting it in a much more colorful suit, and we will be bouncing around the world on Instagram Live, on the Global Livingston Institute Instagram site. And we will have Navio in Uganda, and we'll have Nolis in Rwanda, and Igor Mabano and Nell, and then a whole host of American luminaries and maybe even lumineers all coming to the fore. So please tune in for that on Friday, May Day at 12 o'clock Central Standard Time. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you. Thank you, Gaidi. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Giselda. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Aaron. And thanks to all of our viewers. And that's a wrap.